Welcome to Sinister Happening. Tonight, we dive into the eerie, the inexplicable, and the downright chilling. These aren't just coincidences, they're reality glitches, strange alignments, and moments so uncanny they'll make your spine tingle. From mysterious deaths to prophetic dreams that came true, here are 50 spine-chilling coincidences that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. Let's begin. If you dare. What if I told you that the universe might be playing an elaborate game with us? One where the rules are written in a language we've never learned to read? Tonight, we're diving into 50 real-life coincidences so terrifying, so impossibly precise, that they'll leave you questioning whether fate exists or if something far more sinister is pulling the strings of reality. 1. The Lincoln-Kennedy Conspiracy. Did you know that two presidents, separated by a century, shared a destiny so intertwined it defies explanation? Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected exactly 100 years later, in 1946. Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Kennedy in 1960. But here's where it gets chilling. Both presidents were shot on a Friday, both were shot in the head, and both were with their wives when it happened. Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Ford Lincoln car. Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was born in 1839. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by their three names, and both names contain 15 letters. Lincoln's successor was Andrew Johnson, born in 1808. Kennedy's successor was Lyndon Johnson, born in 1908. The coincidences don't end there. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, who warned him not to go to the theater. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, who warned him not to go to Dallas. Both Booths and Oswald were killed before their trials. These aren't just coincidences anymore. They're a pattern that suggests something far more mysterious at work. 2. The Titanic Prophecy. 14 years before the Titanic sank, a man named Morgan Robertson wrote a novel that predicted the disaster with terrifying accuracy. In his book, Futility, Robertson described a massive British passenger ship called the Titan that was deemed unsinkable. The fictional ship was the largest vessel of its time, carrying lifeboats for only half its passengers. On a cold April night, the Titan struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank, killing most of its passengers. When the real Titanic sank in 1912, the parallels were so precise they sent chills down readers' spines. Both ships were approximately 800 feet long. Both could carry around 3,000 passengers. Both were traveling at similar speeds when they hit the iceberg, and both sank in the same area of the Atlantic. The fictional disaster occurred on an April night, just like the real one. Robertson had never been on a ship like the Titanic, had no inside knowledge of its design, and claimed the story came to him in a dream. But perhaps the most unsettling detail is that Robertson died in 1915, just 3 years after his fictional nightmare became reality, taking with him the secret of how he saw the future. 3. The Cursed Phone Number. In Bulgaria, there exists a phone number that has killed everyone who's ever owned it. The number 0888 -888 -888 was first assigned to Mobitel CEO Vladimir Grashnov in 2001. Within a year, Grashnov died of cancer at age 48. The number was then given to mafia boss Konstantin Dimitrov, who was shot dead in 2003 during a meal with a supermodel in Bulgaria's capital. The third owner was businessman Konstantin Dishliev, who was gunned down in 2005 outside an Indian restaurant in Sofia. Each death occurred within 2 years of owning the number. The Bulgarian mobile phone company Mobitel finally suspended the number permanently, refusing to assign it to anyone else. Employees reported that even mentioning the number in the office made them uncomfortable. What makes this even more disturbing is that all three men were successful, powerful individuals who had survived dangerous careers until they got that number. Investigators found no connection between the deaths other than the cursed digits. The company has never explained why they believe the number is dangerous, but they've kept it locked away for over 2 decades, as if they know something about it that the public doesn't. 4. The Phantom Time Hypothesis. What if nearly 3 centuries of history never actually happened? In 1991, German historian Heribert Illig proposed that the years 614 to 911 AD were completely fabricated and that we're actually living in the 18th century. Illig's theory emerged from his discovery of disturbing inconsistencies in medieval records. Archaeological evidence from this period is remarkably scarce, and many supposedly ancient buildings show construction techniques that weren't developed until later periods. The most chilling evidence comes from astronomy. Calculations of historical eclipses don't match up with recorded dates from this era. Carbon dating of artifacts from this period produces results that are consistently off by exactly 297 years. Illig suggests that Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII conspired to fabricate centuries of history to place themselves in the prestigious year 1000 AD. But here's what really sends shivers down your spine. If Illig is right, then countless historical figures we think we know, Charlemagne, Alfred the Great, the entire Carolingian dynasty, never existed. Every textbook, every historical document, every archaeological finding from those 3 centuries would be part of the most elaborate hoax in human history. And the truly terrifying part? We might never know the truth, because the evidence was buried nearly 1,000 years ago. 5. The doppelganger curse. In 1968, 2 women who had never met were living parallel lives so identical it defied logic. Jeanette Blackwood from Manchester and Margaret Richardson from London were both born on the same day in 1943. Both had been adopted as infants by families whose surnames started with B and R, respectively. Both grew up with 2 adopted sisters and 1 adopted brother. Both married men named Robert in 1965. Both had 2 daughters born in 1967 and 1969. Both worked as nurses in pediatric wards. Both drove the same model blue Ford Escort. Both had the same recurring nightmare about drowning in a bathtub. On the 17th of October, 1968, both women were admitted to different hospitals for emergency appendectomies. Both operations began at exactly 3:47 p.m. Both women experienced identical complications during surgery. Both died on the operating table at 4:23 p.m. The surgeons later discovered that both women had been born with the same extremely rare genetic condition that affects only 1 in 10 million people. But here's the part that haunts everyone who knew them. 3 days before they died, both women called their families to say they had dreamed about meeting their other self, and that when they did, one of them would have to die. Neither woman knew the other existed, yet somehow they both sensed that their identical lives were about to end. 6. The Reincarnation Files. In 1958, a 3-year-old boy named Parmod Sharma began describing his other life with details so specific they terrified his parents. Parmod claimed he owned a shop in Moradabad, a town 90 miles away that his family had never visited. He described his shop's location, his wife's name, his children's names, and even his own death from a stomach illness. His parents, hoping to end his obsessions, took him to Moradabad. Using only the boy's descriptions, they found the exact shop he had described. The shop had belonged to Parmanand Mehra, who had died of stomach problems in 1943, exactly 15 years before Parmod was born. Parmod recognized Parmanand's family members by name, knew details about their personal lives that had never been shared with outsiders, and could navigate the town as if he had lived there his entire life. But the most chilling moment came when Parmod led them to a spot in the shop's floor and said, "This is where I hid my money." When they dug up the spot, they found a box containing exactly 500 rupees, money that Parmanand's family had never found after his death. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who investigated the case, could find no way the boy could have acquired this information normally. Parmod's memories began fading when he turned 7, but he kept one disturbing detail. He remembered the moment of Parmanand's death, and he said that dying felt like falling asleep and waking up in the wrong body. 7. The Premonition Plane Crash. On the 21st of October, 1966, Errol Mai Jones, a 10-year-old girl from Aberfan, Wales, told her mother about a terrible dream. She said she saw her school covered in something black and that she couldn't breathe. The next morning she told her mother she wasn't afraid to die because she would be with her classmates Peter and June. Her mother dismissed it as a child's imagination. That same day, at 9:15 a.m., a coal waste landslide buried Pantless Junior School, killing 144 people, including 116 children. Errol Mai Jones was among the victims, found dead alongside her classmates Peter and June, exactly as she had predicted. But Errol Mai wasn't the only one who had premonitions. Dr. John Barker investigated the disaster and found that 76 people had experienced prophetic dreams or visions about the tragedy in the weeks leading up to it. A woman in Plymouth dreamed of children screaming and being covered in coal. A man in northwest England saw the name Aberfan written in large letters and felt overwhelming dread. Most disturbing of all, several parents in Aberfan itself had nightmares about their children dying at school but were too afraid to keep them home. The tragedy had cast its shadow into the past, reaching back in time to warn people who couldn't understand what they were seeing. But why did the universe choose to show them a disaster they couldn't prevent? 8. The Vanishing Hotel. In 1979, two couples driving through France experienced something that shouldn't be possible. The Simpsons and Gisbys were travelling from Dover to Spain when they stopped at a quaint, old-fashioned hotel in Montelimar. The hotel seemed frozen in time. The staff wore period clothing, the rooms had heavy wooden furniture, and there was no telephone or modern amenities. The food was delicious but strangely prepared, and the bill was remarkably cheap. The families took photographs and kept their receipts. 2 weeks later, on their return journey, they decided to stop at the same hotel. But when they reached Montelimar, the hotel was gone. In its place stood a modern building that locals claimed had been there for decades. The families returned to England confused but assumed they had simply taken a wrong turn. When they developed their vacation photographs, they discovered something terrifying. The photos from the hotel showed only empty rooms and corridors. The receipts had faded to blank paper. But the most chilling discovery came when they showed the photos to a historian. The uniforms worn by the hotel staff were authentic French police uniforms from 1905. The historian also identified the hotel's architecture as typical of early 1900s French inns, buildings that had been destroyed during World War II. The two families had somehow spent a night in the past, in a hotel that had been demolished 40 years earlier, and reality had closed behind them like a door slamming shut. 9. The Elevator to Nowhere. In 1943, Army Lieutenant Colonel William Faulkner was working late in the Pentagon when he decided to take an elevator to the parking garage. He pressed the button for the basement level, but when the doors opened, he found himself in a place that couldn't exist. The basement was enormous, stretching far beyond what the Pentagon's blueprints showed was possible. The ceiling was stone, carved with symbols he didn't recognize. The air smelled of something ancient and metallic. In the distance, he could hear the sound of machinery that hadn't been invented yet. As he explored, he found corridors filled with filing cabinets containing documents about events that wouldn't happen for decades. He saw records of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and technologies that wouldn't be developed until the 1970s. In one room, he found a map of the world showing countries that didn't exist in 1943. Most disturbing of all, he found a file with his own name on it, containing detailed reports about his life events that hadn't happened yet, including his death date, the 15th of March, 1977. When he tried to leave, he couldn't find the elevator. He wandered for what felt like hours before finally finding a staircase that led back to the Pentagon's normal basement. When he reported the incident, his superiors told him it was classified and that he must never speak of it again. But other Pentagon employees began reporting similar experiences. The elevator to the impossible basement appeared randomly, taking people to a place that contained information about the future. Lieutenant Colonel Faulkner died exactly as predicted, on the 15th of March, 1977, and with his death, the reports of the mysterious basement stopped forever. 10. The Coincidence of Names. In 1920, a British couple named the Parkers discovered they had been living the same life as another couple without knowing it. James and Mary Parker from London learned about James and Mary Parker from Manchester when a mix-up at the post office delivered their mail to the wrong address. The coincidences began with their names but extended to every aspect of their lives. Both couples had been married on the 12th of June, 915. Both had two children, a son born in 1916 and a daughter born in 1918. Both children had the same names, Thomas and Elizabeth. Both families lived at houses numbered 42, on streets named Victoria. Both men worked as accountants, both women as seamstresses. Both families owned black cats named Midnight. Both couples had lost their first pregnancy in the same month of 1914. Both families took annual holidays to Brighton in the first week of August. When the couples finally met, they discovered they looked so similar that people often mistook them for each other. But the most unsettling discovery came when they compared family histories. Both James Parkers had been born in the same hospital in Liverpool, just 3 hours apart. Both Mary Parkers had been born in the same hospital in Birmingham, on the same day. The hospital records showed that both couples' mothers had been best friends as children, but had lost touch before their children were born. As they dug deeper, they realized that their entire lives had been paralleling each other across hundreds of miles, as if they were living the same existence, split into two identical timelines. The couples remained friends for life, but they never stopped wondering if they were somehow the same people living in different dimensions. 11. The Cursed Symphony. In 1888, composer Gustav Mahler began work on his Symphony No. 9, unaware that he was composing his own death sentence. Throughout musical history, a strange pattern had emerged. No composer had ever survived completing their 9th symphony. Beethoven died after his 9th. Schubert died after his 9th. Dvorak died after his 9th. When Mahler realized this pattern, he became obsessed with the curse. He tried to outsmart fate by calling his next work Das Lied von der Erde instead of Symphony No. 9, and then numbered his actual 9th symphony as his 10th. But the curse was too clever. Mahler died in 1911, shortly after completing what he called his 9th symphony. The pattern continued with other composers. Bruckner died working on his 9th, Vaughan Williams died after his 9th, and most recently, Malcolm Arnold died after completing his 9th in 2006. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. Modern composers who know about the curse still can't escape it. When composers try to break the pattern by skipping the 9th number entirely, they die anyway. When they try to write their 9th symphony but never finish it, they die before completion. The curse doesn't just kill composers, it seems to actively prevent them from finding loopholes. Music scholars have calculated that the statistical probability of this pattern occurring naturally is less than 1 in 10 billion. Something supernatural is connected to the number 9 in music, and it's been killing composers for over 2 centuries. 12. The doppelganger photograph. In 1975, a woman named Diane Weston found a photograph that changed her understanding of reality. While cleaning out her deceased grandmother's attic, she discovered a family photo from 1932 that showed her grandmother as a young woman standing next to someone who looked exactly like Diane herself. The resemblance was perfect. Same face, same hair, same height, same distinctive birthmark on the left cheek. But Diane wasn't born until 1952, 20 years after the photo was taken. The woman in the photograph was wearing clothes from the 1930s and standing in front of a building that had been demolished in 1940. Diane showed the photo to other family members, and they all confirmed that the woman in the picture was not her grandmother's sister or any known relative. They also confirmed that the photo had been in the family's possession since 1932, making it impossible for it to be a modern fake. Diane became obsessed with discovering the identity of her doppelganger. She researched census records, newspaper archives, and city directories from the 1930s. Finally, she found a match, a woman named Dorothy Brennan, who had lived in the same city as Diane's grandmother. Dorothy had been born in 1910 and died in 1933, just 1 year after the photo was taken. But here's what sent chills through Diane's spine. Dorothy Brennan's death certificate listed her cause of death as unknown circumstances, and noted that she had been found in her apartment with a photograph of Diane's grandmother in her hand. The two women had somehow been connected across time, but neither had lived to understand what that connection meant. 13. The Prediction Diary. In 1952, a French woman named Madame Delacroix began keeping a diary of her dreams, not knowing she was documenting the future. Her entries seemed like random nightmares at first: plane crashes, political assassinations, natural disasters, and celebrity deaths. But as years passed, her family noticed that her dreams were coming true with frightening accuracy. She dreamed of President Kennedy's assassination in 1961, 2 years before it happened. She dreamed of the Challenger explosion in 1981, 5 years before the disaster. She dreamed of Princess Diana's death in 1992, 5 years before the car crash in Paris. Each dream was recorded in her diary with specific details, dates, locations, and circumstances that proved to be precisely accurate. But Madame Delacroix wasn't just seeing disasters. She also predicted positive events: the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of apartheid in South Africa, and the invention of the internet. Her diary contained over 200 predictions, and 187 of them came true exactly as she had described. The most disturbing entry was her final one, dated the 23rd of December, 1999. She wrote, "I have seen my own death. It will come at 3:33 a.m. on the 1st of January, 2000. I will die peacefully in my sleep, and my gift will die with me." The dreams have shown me that some people are chosen to see the future, but we are not meant to change it. We are only meant to witness it, and remember, Madame Delacroix died at exactly 3:33 a.m. on the 1st of January, 2000, and her prophetic dreams ended with her death. 14. The Eternal Return. In 1963, a man named Robert Chen experienced something that shouldn't be possible. He lived the same day twice. Chen was a businessman traveling from New York to Chicago for a meeting. He remembered every detail of the day: the flight number, the conversations with fellow passengers, the hotel room number, and the exact contents of his business meeting. But when he woke up the next morning, he was back in his New York hotel room, and it was the same date again. Initially, Chen thought he had suffered a memory lapse or hallucination. But as the day progressed, every event unfolded exactly as he remembered from the day before. The same passengers sat in the same seats, the same flight attendant spilled coffee on the same passenger, and the same business meeting covered the same topics with the same outcomes. Chen tried to change events by acting differently, but the day continued on its predetermined path. Other people made the same choices, said the same words, and reacted the same way regardless of what Chen did. The most terrifying aspect was that Chen retained his memories from the previous iteration of the day, but everyone else seemed to be living it for the first time. The day repeated exactly 7 times before Chen finally found himself waking up on the next day's date. He never experienced the phenomenon again, but he spent the rest of his life haunted by the implications. If one day could repeat, what did that mean about the nature of time and free will? And why had he been chosen to remember while everyone else remained trapped in the loop? 15. The Phantom Caller. In 1971, the Patterson family began receiving phone calls from their son David, who had died in a car accident 3 months earlier. The calls always came at 3:17 a.m., the exact time David had died. At first, the family thought it was a cruel prank, but the voice on the phone knew intimate details about David's life that only family members could know. The caller knew about David's childhood fears, his secret diary entries, and conversations he had with his parents that no one else had witnessed. The voice sounded exactly like David, down to his distinctive laugh and the way he pronounced certain words. During the calls, David would describe what he was experiencing in the afterlife, but his descriptions were fragmented and confusing. He spoke of being in a place that was neither light nor dark, where time moved differently. He said he was trying to find his way back to warn his family about something important, but he couldn't remember what. The calls continued for exactly 1 year, with David's voice becoming weaker and more distant with each conversation. In the final call, David said, "I can't hold on much longer. The connection is fading, but I need you to know that what happened to me wasn't an accident. Check the brake lines on Mom's car. And tell Jenny that I forgive her." The line went dead, and the calls never came again. The family checked the brake lines on their mother's car and found they had been deliberately cut. If David hadn't warned them, his mother would have died in an accident identical to his own. They never found out who Jenny was or what David had to forgive her for, but they never stopped wondering if their son had somehow reached across death to save another life. 16. The time slip store. In 1996, two friends shopping in Liverpool city centre walked into a store that existed in the past. Sarah and Helen were looking for clothing when they noticed a shop they had never seen before, despite having walked this street hundreds of times. The store, called Cripps, had an old-fashioned appearance with vintage window displays and peculiar clothing styles. Inside, the shop was unusually quiet, with no background music or modern fixtures. The prices were incredibly low. Items that should have cost pounds were priced in shillings and pence. The shop assistants were dressed in outdated uniforms and spoke with old-fashioned accents. When Sarah tried to pay with modern currency, the cashier looked confused and asked if she had proper money. The friends left the store feeling unsettled and decided to return the next day with correct change. But when they came back, the shop had vanished. In its place was a modern clothing store that employees said had been there for years. The friends researched the name Cripps and discovered it was a department store that had operated in Liverpool from 1860 to 1967. The store had been demolished in 1967 to make way for modern buildings. But here's what made their experience even more disturbing. They later found a photograph of the original Cripps store, and it matched their memories perfectly, down to the window displays and the uniforms worn by the staff. Sarah and Helen had somehow stepped into a store that had been gone for 30 years, shopped in the past, and returned to the present when reality reasserted itself. 17. The Miracle Mile. In 1984, a man named Tom Bradley experienced an impossible coincidence that saved his life 6 times in one day. Bradley was a construction worker in Detroit who was known for his punctuality and routine. But on the 15th of March, 1984, everything went wrong in ways that seemed designed to delay him. His alarm clock failed to go off, his car wouldn't start, he missed his bus, and a series of minor mishaps kept him from reaching his usual destinations at his usual times. Each delay frustrated him more, but each delay also saved his life. The building where he was supposed to work collapsed at 8:30 a.m., exactly when he would have been on the 3rd floor. The bus he usually took was involved in a fatal accident at 9:15 a.m. The restaurant where he planned to have lunch was destroyed by a gas explosion at 12:30 p.m. The bank where he intended to cash his paycheck was robbed at 2:45 p.m. and 2 customers were shot. The grocery store where he shopped was struck by a runaway truck at 4 p.m. The bar where he met friends after work was destroyed by a fire at 6:30 p.m. Each disaster occurred at the exact time Bradley would have been there on a normal day. The statistical probability of avoiding 6 fatal disasters in one day is beyond calculation. But the most chilling part came when Bradley reviewed his day and realized that each delay had been caused by something that had never happened to him before. His reliable alarm clock had no mechanical problems. His well-maintained car had no electrical issues, and the bus he missed had arrived exactly on time every day for 2 years. It was as if some invisible force had manipulated reality to keep him away from danger, orchestrating a series of minor inconveniences to prevent major tragedy. 18. The Borrowed Life. In 1977, a woman named Margaret Lewis discovered she had been living someone else's life for 32 years. Margaret had always felt like she didn't belong in her own life, but she attributed this to normal human dissatisfaction. Then she received a phone call from a woman named Margaret Lewis, who lived in Scotland. The Scottish Margaret had been trying to trace her family history, and had found records suggesting that she and the American Margaret had somehow switched identities at birth. As the two women compared their lives, they discovered impossible similarities. Both had been born on the same day in hospitals that were sister institutions. Both had been adopted by families named Lewis. Both had grown up with the same inexplicable memories of a place they had never been, a small cottage by a lake surrounded by pine trees. Both had the same recurring nightmare about being separated from their real family. Both had made the same unusual career choices and had married men with the same first name. When they finally met, they discovered they were identical twins who had been separated at birth and given to different families. But the hospital records showed no evidence of twin births on their birthday. The birth certificates, adoption papers, and family histories had all been altered or fabricated. Someone had deliberately hidden the fact that they were twins and had ensured they would live identical lives hundreds of miles apart. The most disturbing discovery was that their adoptive families had never known they were adopting twins. The people who arranged the adoptions had manipulated two families into unknowingly participating in an elaborate social experiment. Margaret and Margaret spent the rest of their lives trying to discover who had orchestrated their separation and why, but they never found answers. They had been pawns in someone else's game, living borrowed lives that were never meant to be theirs. 19. The Death Echo. In 1965, a small town in Oregon experienced a phenomenon that made residents question the nature of death itself. For exactly 1 week, every person who died in the town continued to be seen by multiple witnesses for 24 hours after their death. The first case was elderly Mrs. Henderson, who died of natural causes at 2 a.m. on Monday. By 6 a.m., 3 different neighbors reported seeing her gardening in her backyard, wearing the same clothes she had died in. The sightings continued throughout the day, with Mrs. Henderson appearing to go about her normal routine, checking her mail, watering her plants, and sitting on her porch. But she never interacted with anyone and seemed unaware of people trying to talk to her. The pattern repeated with every death that week. A man who died in a car accident was seen driving the same route he took to work each day. A woman who died in the hospital was seen walking through her house, turning lights on and off. A child who drowned in the river was seen playing in the same spot where the accident occurred. The echoes always lasted exactly 24 hours and then stopped abruptly. Medical professionals confirmed that all the deaths were genuine, but the entire town witnessed the after-images of the deceased continuing their earthly routines. The phenomenon ended as suddenly as it began. After exactly 7 days, no one ever experienced it again, and no one could explain why it happened. But the residents of the town never forgot those 7 days when death seemed to have an echo, when the recently deceased couldn't quite let go of their living habits. The experience left everyone wondering if death was truly final, or if some part of us continues to repeat the patterns of life even after our bodies stop functioning. 20. The Vanishing Day. In 1970, an entire day disappeared from the calendar in a small village in Romania, and no one noticed until 20 years later. The village of Rachitsi had been keeping detailed records of births, deaths, and daily events for over a century. But when historians reviewed the records in 1990, they discovered that the 15th of October, 1970, had never happened. The records jumped directly from the 14th of October to the 16th of October, with no gap or explanation. Initially, historians assumed this was a clerical error, but as they investigated further, they found that the missing day had been systematically erased from every record in the village. Newspaper delivery logs showed no papers delivered on the 15th of October. The church records showed no services held. The school attendance records showed no classes. The post office showed no mail sorted. Most disturbing of all, when they interviewed elderly residents who had lived in the village during 1970, none of them could remember the 15th of October. They all recalled the 14th of October clearly, and had vivid memories of the 16th of October, but when asked about the day between, they experienced a strange mental blank. Medical records showed that no one in the village had been born or died on the 15th of October, 1970, despite the statistical probability that at least one significant life event should have occurred. Weather records from neighboring villages showed normal weather patterns, but Rachitsi had no weather data for that date. The most chilling discovery was that the missing day had been precisely 24 hours long. The village's clock tower, which had been running accurately for decades, showed no signs of being reset or adjusted. Somehow, an entire day had been removed from time itself, taking with it all human memory and records of what should have happened. The village of Rachitsi had lost a day, and reality had closed the gap so seamlessly that no one noticed for 2 decades. 21. The Parallel Accident. In 1973, 2 identical accidents occurred simultaneously in different countries, involving people who had never met but whose lives were mysteriously connected. At exactly 3:42 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, Thomas Wright crashed his blue Ford on a country road in Wales, while Thomas Wright crashed his blue Ford on a country road in New Zealand. Both men were 34 years old, both were driving to visit their mothers, and both were killed instantly when their cars hit the same type of tree. The accidents were identical in every detail. Both cars were travelling at the same speed, Both hit trees of the same species, both men were wearing identical clothes, and both were carrying the same amount of money in their wallets. But the coincidences went deeper than the accidents themselves. Both Thomas Wrights had been born on the same day in 1939. Both had served in the military, both had worked as electricians, and both had married women named Mary. Both had 2 children with the same names and birth dates. Both had lived at addresses with the same house numbers on streets with similar names. When the families were contacted about the accidents, they discovered that both men had been experiencing the same recurring nightmare for weeks before their deaths. Both had dreamed of dying in a car crash, and both had told their wives they felt like they were living someone else's life. The most unsettling discovery came when the families exchanged photographs. The 2 Thomas Wrights looked exactly alike, despite being born on different continents to unrelated parents. DNA tests confirmed they were not related, yet they had lived identical lives and died identical deaths at the exact same moment. The coincidence was so precise that investigators wondered if they had witnessed the same person living in 2 different realities simultaneously, until both timelines converged in a moment of tragic synchronicity. 22. The prophetic painting. In 1889, artist Vincent van Gogh painted a picture that depicted a disaster that wouldn't happen for 112 years. The painting, titled The Starry Night, shows a swirling sky over a village with a prominent church spire. Art historians have always interpreted the painting as Van Gogh's vision of a peaceful night sky, but in 2001, researchers made a disturbing discovery. When they compared the painting to satellite images of the 11th of September attacks, they found uncanny similarities. The swirling patterns in the sky resembled the smoke patterns from the Twin Towers. The church spire's position matched the location of the World Trade Center, and the overall composition seemed to predict the chaos of that tragic day. But the connections went deeper than visual similarities. Van Gogh painted The Starry Night in June 1889, exactly 112 years before the attacks. The painting contains 11 stars in the swirling sky, and the attacks occurred on the 11th of September. The cypress tree in the foreground has been interpreted by some as resembling the smoke plumes from the towers. Van Gogh had never been to America and had no way of knowing what the New York skyline would look like in 2001. Yet somehow, during one of his most mentally unstable periods, he created an image that seemed to capture the essence of a tragedy that was more than a century in the future. The most chilling aspect is that Van Gogh himself wrote to his brother Theo about the painting, saying it came to him in a vision that felt more real than reality itself, and that he felt compelled to paint it even though he didn't understand what it meant. Art experts who study Van Gogh's work have noted that The Starry Night is unlike any of his other paintings. It's the only one that seems to depict a scene that never existed, as if he was painting not what he saw, but what he somehow knew was coming. 23. The Identical Strangers. In 1968, 3 identical triplets were unknowingly separated at birth and adopted by different families as part of a secret psychological experiment. Robert, Edward, and David grew up in different social classes, one in a wealthy family, one in a middle-class home, and one in a working-class household. They knew nothing about each other's existence until they accidentally met at college in 1980. The coincidences that led to their reunion were extraordinary. Robert and Edward both attended the same college and were both studying psychology. Students kept confusing them for each other, leading to the discovery that they were twins. When the story hit the newspapers, David saw the article and realized he was the 3rd brother. But the coincidences didn't stop with their meeting. Despite being raised in completely different environments, all 3 had developed identical mannerisms, preferences, and habits. They all smoked the same brand of cigarettes, preferred the same foods, and had the same sleeping positions. All 3 had been wrestlers in high school, all had worked as lifeguards, and all had serious relationships with women named Linda. The most disturbing revelation came when they discovered that their separation hadn't been accidental. They had been part of a secret study conducted by a prestigious adoption agency and a team of psychiatrists who wanted to study the effects of nature versus nurture. The experiment had been designed to separate identical siblings and place them in different social environments to see how genetics would influence their development. The families had never been told they were adopting one of multiple siblings. For 12 years, researchers had been secretly monitoring the boys' development, visiting their homes under false pretenses and conducting psychological evaluations without the family's knowledge. The study was never published, and the researchers took their findings to their graves. The triplets spent years trying to access their files, but most documents had been sealed or destroyed. They discovered that they weren't the only subjects. Dozens of other twins and triplets had been separated for the same experiment. The three brothers became close friends but were haunted by the knowledge that their entire lives had been manipulated by scientists who saw them as laboratory specimens rather than human beings. 24. The endless loop. In 1982, a radio station in Wyoming began broadcasting a song that had never been recorded. The song, which listeners called The Endless Loop, played for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before repeating. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but no one could identify the artist, the composer, or even the language of the lyrics. The station's DJs had no knowledge of the song and insisted they weren't playing it. According to their records, they were broadcasting their regular programming, but every radio in a 50-mile radius was picking up The Endless Loop instead. The song played continuously for 6 months, 24 hours a day, without any breaks for commercials or announcements. Listeners became obsessed with the mysterious broadcast, gathering in groups to analyze the lyrics and try to decode the meaning. Some claimed the song was in an ancient language, while others believed it was a coded message from extraterrestrial sources. Musicians who tried to play along with the song discovered that their instruments would go out of tune when they attempted to match the melody. Recording equipment malfunctioned whenever anyone tried to capture the song, producing only static or silence. The most disturbing aspect was the song's effect on listeners. People who heard it for extended periods began to experience identical dreams about a city that didn't exist, populated by people who spoke the same unknown language as the song's lyrics. The broadcast stopped as suddenly as it began, on the exact 6-month anniversary of when it started. The radio station's equipment showed no signs of tampering, and technicians could find no source for the mysterious signal. To this day, no one has been able to explain where the endless loop came from, but occasionally, people in the area report hearing fragments of the melody in the wind, as if the song is still trying to broadcast itself from somewhere beyond our reality. 25. The duplicate life. In 1975, a woman named Carol Jenkins discovered that another woman had been living her exact life in a parallel timeline. Carol was a nurse in Portland when she received a call from a hospital in Seattle asking why she hadn't shown up for work. The caller insisted that Carol Jenkins was an employee there, but Carol had never worked in Seattle. Curious, she drove to Seattle and found that another Carol Jenkins had indeed been working at the hospital for 3 years. The other Carol Jenkins had the same social security number, the same birth date, and the same employment history. When Carol met her doppelganger, she discovered that they were physically identical and had been making the same life choices independently. Both had become nurses, both had married men named Robert, both had given birth to daughters named Sarah, and both had moved to the Pacific Northwest in the same year. But the most unnerving discovery was that their lives had been running on slightly different timelines. The Seattle Carol was living approximately 6 months ahead of the Portland Carol. Events that had happened to Seattle Carol 6 months earlier were just beginning to happen to Portland Carol. Seattle Carol warned Portland Carol about a series of personal disasters that were about to occur. Her husband would have an affair, she would lose her job due to hospital budget cuts, and her daughter would break her leg in a playground accident. Portland Carol initially dismissed these warnings as coincidence, but every prediction came true exactly as described. The two Carols began meeting regularly, with Seattle Carol serving as a preview of Portland Carol's future. But after 2 years, Seattle Carol suddenly vanished. The hospital had no record of her employment, her apartment was empty, and her family had no memory of her existence. Portland Carol was left alone, wondering if she had met her future self, or if she had somehow split into 2 people living parallel lives that had briefly intersected before one timeline was erased. 26. The Eternal Flame. In 1954, a candle was lit in a small church in Ireland that has been burning continuously for over 70 years, despite multiple attempts to extinguish it. The candle was lit by Father Patrick O'Brien during a memorial service for victims of a local mining disaster. According to witnesses, The candle was an ordinary church candle that should have burned out within hours. But as the service ended, the candle continued to burn with a flame that seemed to renew itself. Over the decades, the candle has burned through multiple renovations, power outages, and even a church fire in 1967 that destroyed everything except the candle and its immediate surroundings. The flame has never flickered, never changed size, and never shown any signs of consuming the wax that surrounds it. Scientists have studied the candle and found no natural explanation for its eternal flame. The wax shows no signs of melting, the wick never shortens, and the flame produces no heat despite giving off light. Chemical analysis of the candle reveals that it's made of ordinary materials with no special properties. The most mysterious aspect is that the candle seems to be connected to significant events in the community. The flame grows brighter before births and dimmer before deaths, as if it's somehow connected to the life force of the town's residents. People who have tried to blow out the candle report that their breath passes through the flame without affecting it. Water poured on the candle evaporates before it can reach the flame. Even when the candle was placed in a vacuum chamber, the flame continued to burn without oxygen. Father O'Brien died in 1973, but before his death, he confessed that he had prayed for a sign that the victims of the mining disaster would be remembered forever. He believed that God had answered his prayer by creating a flame that would burn until every soul from that tragedy found peace. The candle continues to burn today, watched over by successive generations of clergy who have given up trying to understand its mystery and simply accept it as a miracle that defies explanation. 27. The Remembered Future. In 1963, a group of children in a small town in Montana began sharing the same memories of events that hadn't happened yet. The children, all between the ages of 7 and 12, started describing identical memories of growing up in the same town, but in a version where technology was more advanced and buildings were different. They remembered flying cars, buildings made of glass and metal, and people wearing clothes that looked like they were from science fiction movies. Initially, parents and teachers dismissed these as shared fantasies, but the children's descriptions were remarkably consistent and detailed. They drew pictures of the same futuristic buildings, described the same advanced technologies, and even spoke about the same people they claimed to remember from this future version of their town. Child psychologists were brought in to study the phenomenon, but they found no explanation for how 23 children from different families could develop identical false memories. The children insisted that their memories were real and that they sometimes felt like they were living in the wrong time period. As the children grew older, their shared memories became more detailed and specific. They began to predict technological developments that wouldn't be invented for decades: personal computers, cell phones, and the internet. They described these technologies with remarkable accuracy, as if they had personal experience using them. The most disturbing aspect was that the children's predictions were consistently accurate. They correctly predicted the year personal computers would become common, the development of the internet, and even specific technological features that wouldn't be invented until the 1990s. By the time the children reached adulthood, most of their shared memories had proven to be accurate predictions of future technological developments. The group remained close throughout their lives, bound by their shared experience of remembering a future that they had somehow lived before it happened. Scientists who studied the case could never explain how the children had accessed information about technologies that didn't exist yet, or why they had all experienced identical memories of a future that later became reality. 28. The Phantom Train. In 1924, a train appeared on the tracks in Nebraska that wasn't scheduled to exist. The train, pulled by a steam locomotive from the 1800s, was spotted by multiple witnesses traveling along an abandoned railway line that had been out of service for 15 years. The train was carrying passengers dressed in period clothing and seemed to be operating normally, with lights in the windows and smoke coming from the stack. But when railway officials investigated, they found no record of any train using those tracks. The railway line had been officially closed in 1909, and the rails had been partially removed in several sections. Yet multiple witnesses saw the train pass through areas where the tracks no longer existed, as if it was travelling on invisible rails. The phantom train was seen regularly for 3 months, always travelling the same route at the same time, 11:47 p.m. every Tuesday night. Curious observers who tried to photograph the train found that their cameras malfunctioned, producing only blurry images or blank film. Those who tried to get close to the train reported that it seemed to fade away as they approached, like a mirage disappearing when you reach for it. Historical research revealed that the train matched the description of the Prairie Express, which had operated on that route from 1887 to 1909. The Prairie Express had been involved in a tragic accident in 1909 when it derailed during a storm, killing all 43 passengers and crew members. The accident had occurred on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m., exactly the same time the Phantom train appeared. The ghost train's appearances stopped after exactly 13 weeks, which was the same length of time the Prairie Express had been running its route before the fatal accident. Railway workers who had been employed on the original line reported that the Phantom train looked exactly like the Prairie Express, down to the specific locomotive number and the arrangement of passenger cars. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered that several of the witnesses who had seen the Phantom train were descendants of people who had died in the 1909 accident, as if the ghost train was somehow calling to the families of its original passengers. 29. The synchronized lives. In 1971, two women living on opposite sides of the world discovered they were living identical lives without any contact or knowledge of each other. Linda Morrison in Australia and Linda Morrison in Canada began corresponding after a mix-up with international mail revealed their shared name and similar addresses. What started as a simple correction turned into a discovery that challenged everything they thought they knew about coincidence and fate. Both women had been born on the same day in 1945. Both had been adopted by families named Morrison, and both had grown up in coastal towns. Both had married men named David in 1967, both had given birth to twins in 1969, and both had named their children Michael and Michelle. Both had worked as teachers, both had lost their jobs in budget cuts, and both had started their own businesses in 1970. But the synchronicities went beyond major life events. Both women had broken their left arm at age 8, both had their appendix removed at age 16, and both had been in car accidents at age 22. Both had the same favourite foods, the same phobias, and the same recurring nightmare about being chased through a forest. When they exchanged photographs, they discovered they looked like sisters, despite being born on different continents to unrelated parents. The most unsettling discovery came when they compared their daily routines. They woke up at the same time, ate the same breakfast, and made the same choices throughout their days. When one Linda decided to call the other, she would often find that the other Linda had been thinking about calling at the exact same moment. They began to experiment with their connection, testing whether they could influence each other's thoughts and actions across the distance. The experiments were successful. When one Linda concentrated on a specific image, the other Linda would often report seeing that image in her mind. The two women remained in contact for the rest of their lives, continuing to live parallel experiences that seemed to prove they were somehow the same person living in two different bodies. They never found an explanation for their connection, but they took comfort in knowing that somewhere in the world, someone else was living exactly the same life they were. 30. The impossible rescue. In 1978, a man named James Fletcher was saved from drowning by someone who couldn't have existed. Fletcher was fishing alone on a remote lake in Canada when his boat capsized in rough weather. He was pulled underwater by the current and began to drown when he felt someone grab his arm and pull him to the surface. His rescuer was a man in his 50s wearing outdated clothing who helped Fletcher swim to shore. The man introduced himself as William Fletcher and said he had been fishing nearby when he saw the accident. He helped James recover from the cold water and made sure he was safe before disappearing into the woods. Grateful for his rescue, James tried to find William to thank him properly, but local authorities had no record of anyone by that name in the area. When James described his rescuer, an elderly park ranger showed him a photograph from 1923 that showed a man who looked exactly like William Fletcher. The man in the photograph was James Fletcher's grandfather, who had died in 1945, 33 years before the rescue. James had never met his grandfather, who had died before he was born, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. The park ranger confirmed that William Fletcher had been a frequent visitor to the lake in the 1920s and 1930s, but he had drowned in the same lake in 1942 while trying to rescue another fisherman. The location where James was rescued was exactly where his grandfather had died. James's family confirmed that his grandfather had been known for his willingness to help others and had died while attempting to save a stranger from drowning. The rescue had occurred on the anniversary of William Fletcher's death, as if his spirit had returned to the lake to save his grandson from the same fate that had claimed his own life. James never returned to the lake, but he kept the story to himself until he was an old man. He said he never doubted that his grandfather had reached across death to save him, but he could never explain how a dead man had pulled him from the water and spoken to him as if he were still alive. 31. The prophetic newspaper. In 1952, a newspaper in a small town in Wisconsin began printing news stories about events that hadn't happened yet. The Millbrook Daily Herald started running articles about accidents, deaths, and local events that would occur exactly 1 week later. The first incident was dismissed as an incredible coincidence when the paper reported the death of a local farmer who was found dead in his barn 7 days after the article was published. But when the pattern continued, residents became terrified of reading their own local paper. The newspaper's editor, Thomas Brennan, insisted that he had no knowledge of how the future stories were appearing in his paper. He would arrive at work each morning to find the typeset and the stories ready for printing, despite having locked the building securely the night before. The stories were written in the same style as legitimate news articles, with accurate details about people, places, and circumstances, but they described events that wouldn't happen for exactly 7 days. The prophecies were always accurate. Car accidents occurred at the predicted times and locations, people died on the dates specified, and local events unfolded exactly as described. The most disturbing aspect was that the prophetic articles appeared to be written by someone who had witnessed the events firsthand. The articles included details that could only be known by someone who had been present when the events occurred. Residents began to panic when they saw their own names in the prophetic articles. Some tried to prevent the predicted events by changing their routines, but they found that fate seemed to conspire to make the prophecies come true regardless of their actions. The newspaper's circulation plummeted as people became too afraid to read about their own futures. The prophetic articles stopped appearing after exactly 6 months, but Thomas Brennan was found dead in his office on the day the phenomenon ended. His death had been predicted in the final prophetic article, published exactly 7 days before it occurred. The newspaper building was sold and demolished, but no one ever discovered the source of the prophetic stories or why they had chosen that particular newspaper to deliver their messages from the future. 32. The duplicate town. In 1969, a family driving through Nevada took a wrong turn and found themselves in a town that was an exact duplicate of their hometown in Ohio. The Wilson family had been driving cross-country when they became lost and decided to stop for directions in what appeared to be a small desert town. But as they drove through the streets, they realized that the town was laid out exactly like their hometown of Millfield, Ohio. The streets had the same names, the buildings were in the same locations, and even the local businesses had the same names as the ones back home. The most unsettling discovery was that the town was populated by people who looked exactly like the residents of Millfield, Ohio. The family saw their neighbors, their friends, and even people who looked like themselves walking the streets of this impossible duplicate town. But when they tried to interact with these doppelgangers, they found that the people seemed to be going through the motions of daily life without any awareness of the Wilson family's presence. The duplicate residents would walk right through the Wilsons as if they were invisible, and attempts to communicate were met with blank stares. The family tried to find a hotel or restaurant, but the buildings were empty shells with no actual interiors. The duplicate town was like a movie set, designed to look real from the outside, but with no substance behind the facades. As the sun began to set, the town started to fade away like a mirage. The buildings became transparent, the duplicate residents vanished, and the paved streets turned back into desert sand. The Wilson family found themselves standing in an empty desert with no sign that a town had ever existed there. They drove away confused and disturbed, but when they finally reached their real hometown in Ohio, they discovered that during the time they had been lost in the duplicate town, their actual neighbors had been experiencing strange dreams about meeting the Wilson family in a place that looked like their hometown but wasn't real. The entire town had shared the same dream at the same time the Wilson family had been lost in the duplicate version. 33. the living photograph. In 1965, a photographer named Robert Chen developed a photograph that showed events from the future. Chen had been taking pictures at a local carnival when he noticed something strange about one of his photographs. The image showed the carnival scene he had captured, but it also showed events that hadn't happened yet. In the background of the photograph, he could see a fire starting in one of the carnival tents. The image showed people running and screaming, smoke filling the air, and emergency vehicles arriving at the scene. But when Chen had taken the photograph, there had been no fire, no smoke, and no emergency vehicles. The carnival had been running normally with no signs of danger. Chen initially thought there was a problem with his film or developing process, but when he examined the photograph more closely, he realized it was showing the future. The photograph was dated and time-stamped, proving it had been taken before the events it depicted. Exactly 3 hours after Chen developed the photograph, a fire broke out at the carnival in the exact location shown in the image. The fire spread exactly as the photograph had shown. People evacuated following the same patterns, and emergency vehicles arrived at the scene in the same positions depicted in the future image. Chen had somehow captured a photograph of events that hadn't happened yet, creating a visual record of the future. The most disturbing aspect was that the photograph had captured details that Chen couldn't have known in advance. The image showed specific people in specific locations, wearing clothes that Chen had never seen them in, and reacting to events that were still hours in the future. Chen tried to use his camera to capture other future events, but the phenomenon never repeated. The camera remained ordinary, producing only normal photographs of present-day scenes. Chen kept the prophetic photograph for the rest of his life, but he never understood how his camera had briefly become a window into the future. Photography experts who examined the image could find no evidence of manipulation or double exposure, and the chemical composition of the photograph was identical to normal pictures taken with the same equipment. The photograph remained a mystery, a single image that had somehow captured time itself and revealed events that existed in the future but had reached back to be recorded in the present. 34. The Eternal Echo. In 1972, a sound began echoing in the mountains of Colorado that had been made 25 years earlier. The sound was the voice of a missing hiker named David Martinez, who had vanished during a blizzard in 1947. Martinez had been calling for help when he disappeared, and his voice had somehow become trapped in the mountain's acoustic properties, replaying his final words over and over again. The echo was first heard by a group of hikers who were camping in the same area where Martinez had disappeared. They heard a man's voice calling, "Help me! I'm lost!" Coming from the direction of a deep canyon. The hikers searched for the source of the voice, but they found no one in distress. The voice continued to call out at irregular intervals, always saying the same words in the same tone of desperation. Local authorities investigated the reports and confirmed that the voice matched recordings of David Martinez that had been made during the original search and rescue operation in 1947. The voice was coming from a specific location in the canyon where Martinez was believed to have fallen to his death, but his body had never been recovered. Acoustic experts studied the phenomenon and found that the canyon had unique sound properties that could theoretically trap and replay sounds under certain atmospheric conditions. But they couldn't explain how a voice from 1947 had remained trapped for 25 years and then suddenly begun replaying. The echo continued for exactly 1 year, playing Martinez's final words at random intervals day and night. The sound was so clear and distinct that people who heard it often tried to respond, shouting back offers of help to a man who had been dead for decades. The echo stopped abruptly on the 26th anniversary of Martinez's disappearance, but that same day, hikers found his remains in the canyon exactly where the voice had been coming from. Martinez's final words had been echoing through the mountains for 25 years, as if his voice had been calling across time, waiting for someone to finally hear his plea for help and find his body. The discovery brought closure to Martinez's family, but it left everyone wondering how a human voice could become trapped in stone and ice, replaying a moment of crisis across decades, until the mystery was finally solved. 35. The Synchronized Clocks. In 1964, all the clocks in a small town in Maine began keeping time with events that hadn't happened yet. The town of Harmony had always been proud of its synchronized clock system, with clocks throughout the town that were connected to a master timepiece in the town hall. But on the 15th of March, 1964, the clocks began running exactly 24 hours fast. Initially, residents thought there was a malfunction in the master clock, but when they tried to reset the system, they discovered that the clocks were accurate. They were just showing the correct time for the next day. The clocks were displaying the time for events that would happen 24 hours in the future. When the town's residents checked their activities against the advanced time, they found that the clocks were predicting their schedules with perfect accuracy. The clock at the diner showed the exact time customers would arrive for meals the next day. The clock at the school showed when classes would begin and end 24 hours later. The clock at the hospital showed when patients would be admitted and discharged the following day. The most unsettling discovery was that the clocks were predicting events that hadn't been planned yet. The clock at the fire station showed when an emergency call would come in, and exactly 24 hours later, the call arrived at the predicted time. The clock at the police station showed when crimes would be reported, and the reports came in precisely as the clocks had predicted. Residents began to rely on the prophetic clocks to plan their lives, but they found that knowing the future created more anxiety than comfort. They could see when bad news would arrive, when accidents would happen, and when personal crises would occur, but they couldn't change the timing of these events. The clocks continued to run 24 hours fast for exactly 1 month, then suddenly returned to normal time. But during that month, the residents of Harmony had lived in a strange state of temporal displacement, where they knew what tomorrow would bring but were powerless to change it. The phenomenon never repeated, but the townspeople never forgot the month when time moved forward and gave them a glimpse of their immediate future. 36. The Phantom Commuter. In 1976, passengers on a daily commuter train in England began reporting sightings of a man who had died in a train accident 30 years earlier. The man, identified as Charles Whitmore, had been killed in a derailment in 1946, but passengers on the 7:15 a.m. train from Brighton to London claimed to see him riding in the same car every morning. Whitmore always sat in the same seat, wore the same 1940s business suit, and read the same newspaper, The Times, from the 12th of March, 1946, the day he died. Passengers who tried to interact with Whitmore found that he seemed unaware of their presence. He would sit quietly, reading his newspaper and occasionally checking his pocket watch, but he never responded to attempts at conversation. The most disturbing aspect was that Whitmore's presence seemed to be connected to the train's safety. On days when passengers reported seeing him, the train ran smoothly and arrived on time. But on days when he didn't appear, the train experienced mechanical problems, delays, and minor accidents. Regular commuters began to look for Whitmore as a sign that their journey would be safe, and his absence became a source of anxiety among passengers. Railway officials investigated the reports and found that Charles Whitmore had indeed been a regular passenger on the same train route before his death in 1946. He had been commuting to his job at a London bank when the accident occurred, and he had died instantly when the train derailed. The seat where passengers reported seeing Whitmore was the same seat he had occupied on the morning of the accident. The phenomenon continued for exactly 2 years, with Whitmore appearing on the train almost daily. Then, on the 12th of March, 1978, exactly 32 years after his death, passengers reported that Whitmore stood up from his seat, folded his newspaper, and walked toward the front of the train. He turned to look back at the other passengers, tipped his hat, and smiled before disappearing. He was never seen again, but passengers said that his final expression was one of peace and relief, as if he had finally completed his interrupted journey and was ready to move on to whatever came next. 37. The Repeated Day. In 1981, an entire town in Montana experienced the same day 3 times before time moved forward again. The residents of Clearwater woke up on Tuesday, the 13th of October, 1981, and lived through a normal day. But when they went to sleep and woke up the next morning, it was Tuesday, the 13th of October, 1981, again. The same events occurred, the same conversations, the same weather, the same accidents, and the same personal interactions. Initially, residents thought they were confused about the date, but when they checked newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television programs, they confirmed that they were reliving the same day. The second time through Tuesday, the 13th of October, people retained their memories from the first iteration, but everyone else around them seemed to be experiencing the day for the first time. Those who remembered the previous loop tried to change events, but they found that the day unfolded in exactly the same way regardless of their actions. The same people made the same choices, the same accidents occurred at the same times, and the same conversations happened with the same outcomes. On the third iteration of Tuesday, the 13th of October, more residents began to retain their memories from the previous loops. They discovered that they were all experiencing the same phenomenon but were powerless to change the day's events. The town's residents gathered to discuss their situation, but they found that even their meeting to discuss the time loop had been predetermined and occurred in exactly the same way each time. The most disturbing aspect was that the residents could remember making different choices, but their actions always led to the same results. Free will seemed to be an illusion, and the day repeated like a broken record that couldn't move forward. On the fourth morning, the residents woke up to find that time had moved forward to Wednesday, the 14th of October, 1981. Life returned to normal, but the residents of Clearwater were left with the unsettling knowledge that they had lived the same day 3 times and that some force beyond their understanding had control over the flow of time. They never experienced the phenomenon again, but they never forgot the 3 days when time stood still, and they learned that their choices might not be as free as they had always believed. 38. The Living Map. In 1957, a cartographer named Helen Morrison created a map that showed places that didn't exist yet. Morrison was working for the State Highway Department, creating updated maps of rural areas, when she noticed that her newest map showed roads, buildings, and towns that hadn't been built yet. The map depicted a highway that wouldn't be constructed for 10 years, a shopping centre that wouldn't be built for 15 years, and a housing development that wouldn't be planned for 20 years. Initially, Morrison thought she had made errors in her mapping, but when she checked her sources and measurements, she found that her work was accurate. The map was showing the landscape as it would exist in the future, not as it existed in 1957. Over the following decades, Morrison watched as reality slowly caught up with her prophetic map. The highway was built in exactly the location she had drawn, following the same route and connecting the same towns. The shopping centre was constructed in the precise spot shown on the map, with the same layout and configuration. The housing development was built according to the same plan that had mysteriously appeared on Morrison's map 20 years earlier. The most unsettling aspect was that Morrison had no knowledge of any plans for these future developments when she created the map. The highway department had no proposals for the road, the shopping centre developer hadn't yet purchased the land, and the housing development was built by a company that didn't exist in 1957. Morrison had somehow drawn a map of the future, without any access to future information. She kept the original map for the rest of her life, watching as each predicted development became reality. By the time she died in 1987, every feature on her prophetic map had been built exactly as she had drawn it 30 years earlier. Morrison's colleagues examined her other maps but found that none of them showed prophetic information. Only the one map had captured a vision of the future, and Morrison herself never understood how she had drawn places that didn't exist yet. The map remained a mystery, a document that proved the future had somehow reached back in time to guide the hand of a cartographer who thought she was simply doing her job. 39. The Impossible Return. In 1973, a woman named Sarah Collins returned from a trip to find that she had been dead for 3 years. Collins had gone on a solo camping trip in the mountains of Colorado, but she never returned home. Search and rescue teams found her body at the bottom of a ravine, where she had apparently fallen to her death. Collins was buried by her family, who mourned her loss and eventually began to rebuild their lives without her. But 3 years later, Collins walked into her former home, very much alive and confused about why her family was so shocked to see her. Collins had no memory of dying or being buried. According to her recollection, she had been camping for only a week and had decided to come home early. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she left for the trip, and she looked exactly the same as she had 3 years earlier. Collins had no awareness that any time had passed, and she was bewildered by her family's reactions and the changes that had occurred in her absence. The most disturbing discovery was that Collins's grave was empty. When her family took her to the cemetery to show her where she had been buried, they found that the coffin was gone, and the grave showed no signs of ever having been disturbed. The funeral home had no record of what had happened to Collins's body, and the death certificate that had been issued in 1973 had mysteriously vanished from official records. Medical examination confirmed that Collins was alive and healthy, but doctors couldn't explain how someone who had been dead for 3 years could return to life with no memory of dying. Collins' family was overjoyed to have her back, but they were haunted by the knowledge that they had buried someone who looked exactly like Sarah, mourned her death, and then had her return as if nothing had happened. Collins lived for many more years, but she never regained any memory of the 3 years she had been dead. She accepted her family's account of what had happened, but never understood how she had returned from death or what had happened to the body they had buried. The mystery was never solved, and Collins' return remained one of the most puzzling cases of apparent resurrection ever documented. Story 40. The Identical Strangers Who Met at Their Own Funeral. What would you do if you discovered that somewhere in the world there was another person living your exact life, making your exact choices at the exact same time? Maria Santos thought she was losing her mind when she started receiving condolences for her own death. Phone calls from distant relatives, flowers delivered to her door, and most disturbing of all, an obituary in the local newspaper with her name, her birth date, and eerily accurate details about her life. The only difference? The address was across town. Maria's hands trembled as she dialed the number listed in the obituary. A woman answered, and Maria heard her own voice speaking back to her. Not similar, identical. Maria Elena Santos. Same age, same birthday, same maiden name, same career as a pediatric nurse, same scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. They had both married men named Carlos, both had 2 children with the same names, and both had lost their mothers to the same rare disease on the same day 3 years earlier. The 2 women agreed to meet, each convinced they were walking into an elaborate prank. But when they stood face to face in the hospital parking lot where they both worked, different shifts, different floors, paths that had never crossed, they were looking at perfect mirrors of each other. Not just physically, but they discovered they had made identical life choices. They had both chosen nursing after their younger brothers had the same accident. They had both met their husbands at the same cafe, though years apart. They had both named their daughters Isabella and their sons Miguel. The mystery deepened when they traced their backgrounds. Maria was adopted. Maria Elena had been raised by her biological parents. But when they compared adoption records, they discovered something impossible. They weren't twins. They weren't even related. They were born in different hospitals in different states to different parents. Yet DNA tests revealed something that made scientists question everything they thought they knew about genetics and identity. The tests showed they had identical DNA markers that shouldn't exist in unrelated individuals. But the most chilling discovery came when they examined their life timelines closely. Every major decision, every significant event, every choice had happened on the exact same dates. When one Maria had her first child, the other was in labor the same night. When one divorced her first husband, the other was signing divorce papers the same afternoon. When one moved to their current city, the other was unpacking boxes just miles away. The final revelation came when they researched the obituary mix-up. There was no mistake. The newspaper had received 2 identical death notices, submitted by family members who had never met. Both families had planned identical funerals for the same day. The only reason neither woman had actually died was because they had both suddenly decided to visit the other's neighborhood at the exact moment fate had planned to separate them forever. Today, both Marias live in the same city. Their families have become close friends, and they continue to make identical choices without consulting each other. They both became vegetarians last month. They both started learning French the same week, and they both recently dreamed about a third woman, also named Maria Santos, who might be living their exact life somewhere else in the world. Story 41. The lottery numbers that predicted a tragedy. Have you ever wondered if numbers could be trying to tell us something? In 2019, Margaret Chen had been playing the same lottery numbers for 15 years: 04, 12, 18, 22, 31, 45. They weren't random. They were the birth dates of her 6 grandchildren. Every Wednesday and Saturday, she would buy her ticket, knowing she'd never win but enjoying the hope that came with those familiar numbers. What she didn't know was that these numbers were about to reveal a pattern that would change everything she believed about chance and fate. Margaret lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and her routine was as predictable as clockwork. Coffee at 7 a.m, lottery ticket at 10 a.m, lunch at noon, and an afternoon walk through Memorial Park. She had been a math teacher for 37 years and prided herself on understanding probability. She knew her chances of winning were 1 in 292 million, but she also knew someone had to win eventually. What she couldn't have calculated was that her numbers were tracking something far more sinister than lottery drawings. The first sign came on a Tuesday in March. Margaret was reviewing her lottery tickets from the past year when she noticed something odd. Every time there had been a significant accident in their town, her numbers had appeared in the winning combination of major lotteries across the country. Not her exact sequence, but scattered throughout the winning numbers. The school bus accident in January, 2 of her numbers had won the Powerball. The factory fire in February, 4 of her numbers had hit the Mega Millions. The more she researched, the more the pattern became undeniable. Margaret began tracking every lottery drawing and cross-referencing them with local news. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about coincidence. Her grandson's birthday, 04, had appeared in winning combinations exactly one day before every major accident in their town for the past 5 years. The pattern was so consistent that she could predict tragedy by watching the lottery results. But she was just one person, and who would believe a retired math teacher claiming lottery numbers could predict the future? The test came on a Saturday in April. Margaret's number 18 hit in 3 different state lotteries on the same day. Based on her research, this meant a significant accident would occur within 24 hours. She called the police, the fire department, and the mayor's office. They politely listened to the elderly woman's concerns and assured her they would keep an eye out. But Margaret knew she had to do more. She spent the entire next day driving around town, looking for any sign of potential danger. At 3:47 p.m. on Sunday, Margaret was driving past the old bridge when she noticed something that made her heart stop. A school bus full of children returning from a field trip was approaching the bridge from the opposite direction. The bridge looked normal, but Margaret's numbers were screaming at her that something was wrong. She parked her car diagonally across the bridge approach, blocking the bus from crossing. The bus driver was furious, honking and gesturing for her to move. Minutes later, engineers would discover that the bridge's support cables had been compromised by recent storms. The weight of the bus would have caused a catastrophic collapse. Margaret's coincidental interference had saved 37 children and their teachers, but the story doesn't end there. When investigators examined the bridge more closely, they found that the failure would have occurred at exactly 3:52 p.m., the time that appeared when Margaret's lottery numbers were added together. Margaret stopped playing the lottery that day. She now runs a website where she tracks number patterns and has successfully predicted and prevented 17 potential tragedies. Scientists study her methods, but no one can explain how random lottery drawings can forecast future events. Margaret believes the universe speaks in numbers, and she's learned to listen. Story 42. The phone call from a dead man. What if death wasn't the end, but just a different kind of beginning? Sarah Mitchell was making dinner when her phone rang at 6:23 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she heard a voice that made her drop the wooden spoon she was holding. It was her father, calling to tell her he loved her and that everything would be okay. The only problem? Her father had been dead for 7 years. Sarah's father, Robert Mitchell, had been a telephone repair technician for 32 years. He had always joked that he knew every phone line in the city better than the back of his hand. When he died suddenly of a heart attack in 2016, Sarah had kept his old rotary phone as a memento. It sat on her kitchen counter, unplugged, gathering dust and memories. She had never heard it ring because it wasn't connected to anything, until that Tuesday evening when the impossible happened. The voice on the phone was unmistakably her father's, not a recording, not a memory, but his actual voice having a conversation with her. He asked about her job, her husband, her children. He knew details about her life that had happened years after his death. He knew about her promotion, her daughter's graduation, her recent move to a new house. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the same duration as the last conversation they'd had in the hospital the night before he died. Sarah's husband came home to find her staring at the phone, tears streaming down her face. When she told him about the call, he checked their phone records. There was no record of any incoming call at 6:23 p.m. Their service provider confirmed that no call had been made to their number during that time, but Sarah knew what she had heard. She had spoken to her father, and he had responded with the same warmth and love she remembered from when he was alive. The next week, Sarah's sister called with disturbing news. She had also received a call from their father at exactly the same time from a different number. Then their brother called to report the same thing. All 3 siblings had spoken to their dead father simultaneously, from different locations, on different phone lines. Each conversation had been personal, specific, and impossible. The phone company's investigation revealed that all 3 calls had originated from a disconnected number that had once belonged to their father's work truck. Sarah decided to investigate further. She researched her father's old work routes and discovered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about communication and connection. Her father had spent his final years repairing phone lines in the old section of the city, where underground cables dating back to the 1940s created a maze of connections. Some of these lines had never been properly disconnected, creating what technicians called ghost circuits, phantom connections that could carry signals through abandoned networks. The breakthrough came when Sarah found her father's old work journals. In his final entries, he had been documenting strange phenomena in the old phone system. Voices from the past, conversations that seemed to echo through time, numbers that connected to impossible destinations. He had been trying to map what he called the ghost network, a parallel communication system that existed alongside the normal phone infrastructure. His final entry, dated the day before his death, read, "I think I've found a way to stay connected." Sarah now receives calls from her father every few months. Each call lasts exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Each call comes at moments when she needs guidance or comfort. She has learned to prepare for these conversations, to have her questions ready, to make the most of their impossible connection. Phone company technicians have given up trying to explain the phenomenon. They simply note in their records, "Ghost circuit. Do not disconnect." Story 43. The Doppelganger Who Stole a Life. Jennifer Walsh was a struggling marine biology student until strange things started happening. She received awards she never earned, invitations to conferences she never attended, and even a wedding invite to a man she'd never met. Digging deeper, she discovered something terrifying. Another woman with her exact name, face, birth date, and scars, living the successful life she had always dreamed of. Her research? Published under that other Jennifer's namer, exact theories, methods, and words, but years ahead. When they finally met, the doppelganger revealed the truth. They were part of a secret experiment linking parallel selves. Jennifer's hardships had unknowingly fueled her counterpart's success. The offer? Switch lives, only one could keep the winning timeline. Jennifer walked away without answering. She returned to her quiet life, now fiercely protective of her work. But sometimes, in the silence, she wonders, is this the stolen life or the real one? Story 44. The Museum of Future Tragedies. While in Prague, Dr. Helena Reeves stumbled upon a hidden museum that claimed to display events before they happened. Its curator, the eerily calm Carol Novak, showed her headlines dated next week detailing disasters, scandals, and breakthroughs that hadn't occurred yet. She was skeptical until every headline came true. One floor up, photos of catastrophes dated a month into the future wildfires, collapsed bridges, mass deaths, real images, not renderings. The top floor chilled her to the bone. Personal items from tragedies yet to occur, a child's toy from a future school shooting, a wedding ring from an upcoming plane crash, a hospital bracelet from someone still alive. Then Helena saw her own photo, receiving an award for research she hadn't even begun. She was part of the museum's future. When she returned a month later, the museum had vanished. But the worst part? Her visit had been on display years before she even knew the place existed. Story 45. The Accident That Shouldn't Have Happened. Again. On the 15th of March, 2018, Rebecca Chen's life changed when a red pickup truck ran a stop sign and forced her into a lamppost. The driver fled. She survived, shaken but alive. Exactly 1 year later, against her instincts, Rebecca took the same route. Same stop sign, same red truck, same license plate, same man, same golden retriever. She swerved again, different angle, same result. Her car wrecked in the same parking lot. But here's the twist: that truck had been destroyed a year earlier. Its driver, David Martinez, died the day after Rebecca's first accident in a crash involving a red pickup truck with that exact same plate. Security footage confirmed it. The truck was real but shouldn't exist. Now, Rebecca avoids the 15th of March like a curse. She's joined a group of others who've lived through similar glitches accidents that repeat, reality loops that don't obey time or reason. And each year she wonders, what happens if the echo comes again and she doesn't survive it this time? Story 45. The accident that shouldn't have happened again. On the 15th of March, 2018, Rebecca Chen's life changed when a red pickup truck ran a stop sign and forced her into a lamppost. The driver fled. She survived, shaken but alive. Exactly 1 year later, against her instincts, Rebecca took the same route. Same stop sign, same red truck, same license plate, same man, same golden retriever. She swerved again, different angle, same result. Her car wrecked in the same parking lot. But here's the twist: that truck had been destroyed a year earlier. Its driver, David Martinez, died the day after Rebecca's first accident in a crash involving a red pickup truck with that exact same plate. Security footage confirmed it. The truck was real but shouldn't exist. Now, Rebecca avoids the 15th of March like a curse. She's joined a group of others who've lived through similar glitches accidents that repeat, reality loops that don't obey time or reason. And each year she wonders, what happens if the echo comes again and she doesn't survive it this time? Story 46. The child who remembered tomorrow. At first, Sarah Williams thought her 4-year-old daughter Emma just had a vivid imagination. She'd talk about things like tomorrow's breakfast or next week's storm, as if they had already happened. But when Emma began predicting future events with chilling precision, Sarah realized something wasn't right. It started with Emma announcing that school would be closed tomorrow because of a broken water pipe. The next morning it was. Then came eerily accurate predictions: a neighbor's pregnancy, a power outage lasting exactly 3 hours, a stray cat arriving injured. Emma wasn't guessing, she was remembering things no one else knew yet. Her most disturbing memory: that her dad's car would break down on Thursday with a funny noise. It did, down to the exact location and sound. Terrified but intrigued, Sarah consulted Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a psychologist who documented Emma's abilities and confirmed what she called temporal displacement memories from potential futures. Controlled experiments showed Emma had nearly perfect accuracy. But Emma's gift was also a burden. She'd grow anxious when plans didn't match her memories. She'd cry over future tragedies no one else could see coming. Sarah and her husband had to learn to navigate time from Emma's perspective, not as a straight line, but a shifting map of probabilities. As Emma grew, she learned to filter what she shared, warning only when it truly mattered. Now 12, she's helped people avoid medical emergencies, accidents, even life-altering mistakes. Her insights aren't always welcome, but they've saved lives. What haunts Sarah most isn't Emma's predictions, it's the idea that time might not be as fixed as we believe, and that her daughter, somehow, walks a step ahead of us all. Story 47. The town that disappeared and maybe never existed. In 1995, the Henderson family stopped in a picturesque town called Millbrook Valley while driving across Nebraska. It wasn't on any map, but the exit was clearly marked. The town was charming: antique shops, a cozy diner named Murphy's, and locals who welcomed them like old friends. They took photos, bought souvenirs, and promised to return someday. 5 years later, they did. But Millbrook Valley was gone. No exit sign, no diner, no town, just open fields and an abandoned gas station. Confused, they searched for answers. Locals had never heard of the town, The Nebraska historical records showed no town by that name ever existed. Murphy's Diner? No business license. The friendly cop who gave them directions? No such officer had ever worked in the area. And yet the Hendersons still had photos, postcards, and a brochure from the town's visitor, sent a tangible proof of a place no one else could find. Experts offered unsettling theories: a temporal slip, a window into a parallel timeline, or a manifestation of collective memory. Stranger still, other travellers have since reported seeing the same exit. Stopping, exploring, then returning years later to nothing. Now, the Hendersons collect these stories because somewhere in memory, in another version of reality, or somewhere in between Millbrook Valley might still be waiting. Story 48. The prescription that cured the wrong disease. What if a medical mistake turned out to be a miracle? Dr. Susan Parker accidentally prescribed heart medication to Margaret Foster, who had come in for chronic migraines. Margaret had suffered debilitating headaches for 10 years, trying countless treatments with no relief. When she unknowingly took the wrong prescription, something extraordinary happened. 3 days later, Margaret called Dr. Parker in amazement. Her migraines had completely disappeared. Doctor. Parker was horrified to discover her mistake and immediately ordered Margaret to stop taking the heart medication. But Margaret refused. For the first time in a decade, she was pain-free. Tests revealed that Margaret had an undiagnosed heart condition that was causing restricted blood flow to her brain, triggering the migraines. The heart medication had corrected the underlying problem that dozens of specialists had missed. Doctor. Parker's mistake had accidentally treated the root cause of Margaret's condition rather than just the symptoms. Margaret's cardiologist confirmed that without the accidental prescription, her undiagnosed heart condition could have caused a fatal heart attack within months. But the coincidence deepened when Dr. Parker reviewed her other patients' files. She discovered that she had made similar mistakes with 5 other patients over the years, accidentally prescribing medications for conditions they didn't know they had. In every case, the wrong prescription had revealed and treated serious underlying health problems that had gone undiagnosed. Medical researchers studied Dr. Parker's cases and found that her unconscious pattern recognition was identifying subtle symptoms that even sophisticated diagnostic tests had missed. Her mistakes weren't random errors. They were her subconscious mind detecting health patterns that her conscious mind couldn't process. Doctor. Parker now practices intuitive medicine, trusting her instincts alongside traditional diagnostics. Margaret's story spread through the medical community, leading to new research on the connection between heart conditions and migraines. Her accidental cure became the foundation for a new treatment protocol that has helped thousands of patients whose chronic pain was actually caused by undiagnosed cardiovascular problems. Story 49. The dream that saved a stranger. Have you ever had a dream so vivid that you couldn't ignore it? Emily Chen was a pragmatic accountant who didn't believe in premonitions. But one February night, she had a disturbing dream about a car accident involving a red-haired woman she'd never met. The dream was impossibly detailed. She could see the license plate, the highway mile marker, and the time on the dashboard, 3:47 p.m. Emily woke up shaken by the vivid images of a blue sedan sliding under a jackknifed semi-truck. She tried to dismiss it, but something compelled her to write down every detail. The next day, she couldn't concentrate and found herself watching the clock as 3:47 p.m. approached. On impulse, she called Highway Patrol and reported her concerns about the specific location from her dream. At exactly 3:47 p.m., officers found a blue sedan pulled over at the mile marker from Emily's dream. The driver was a red-haired woman who had pulled over when she saw police cars ahead, inadvertently avoiding the jackknifed semi-truck blocking traffic half a mile ahead. Her license plate matched Emily's written notes perfectly. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, was stunned when officers explained about Emily's dream. She'd been driving to a job interview, talking nervously to her mother on the phone, exactly as Emily had seen. If she hadn't pulled over, she would have hit the jackknife truck at full speed. The accident Emily dreamed about would have been fatal. Emily and Sarah met and discovered remarkable coincidences. They'd attended the same university, worked in the same building, and had mutual friends. Researchers who studied Emily found she had unusually high temporal sensitivity, the ability to perceive future events through dreams. She now works with law enforcement, successfully preventing accidents and solving cases through her prophetic dreams. The pragmatic accountant who once dismissed the supernatural now dedicates her life to using her gift to help others. Emily learned that sometimes the most important information comes from sources that can't be explained by logic, and that the line between dreams and reality isn't as clear as she once believed. Story 50. The lottery winner who couldn't lose. What if winning the lottery wasn't about luck but about destiny? Marcus Thompson had never bought a lottery ticket in his life. He was a practical man who understood statistics and knew that lottery tickets were a waste of money. But on his 40th birthday, his co-workers at the construction company pooled their money to buy him a ticket as a joke. The numbers they chose were completely random: 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42. Marcus won $50,000 and thought it was the luckiest day of his life. He had no idea it was just the beginning. Marcus decided to quit while he was ahead and never buy another lottery ticket. But fate had other plans. Over the next 6 months, people kept giving him lottery tickets as gifts, tips, and jokes. His barber gave him a scratch-off ticket. His neighbor handed him a Powerball ticket she didn't want. A stranger at a gas station gave him a ticket he had dropped. Every single ticket was a winner. After winning his 8th lottery prize in 6 months, Marcus realized something impossible was happening. He wasn't just lucky, he was incapable of losing. Every lottery ticket that came into his possession, regardless of how he acquired it, was a winning ticket. The amounts varied from small prizes to jackpots, but the pattern was undeniable. Marcus Thompson could not lose the lottery. Word of Marcus's incredible streak spread through the local community and eventually reached the attention of lottery officials. They investigated his wins, suspecting fraud or manipulation, but found no evidence of wrongdoing. The tickets were legitimate, purchased from different locations by different people. Marcus wasn't buying them himself. They were finding their way to him through seemingly random encounters. The investigation revealed something even more extraordinary. Marcus's birthday, the day he had received his first winning ticket, was exactly 40 years after the first lottery drawing in his state. His social security number, when rearranged, matched the winning numbers from the state's biggest jackpot. His address corresponded to coordinates that marked the exact center of all lottery retail locations in his city. Marcus tried to refuse lottery tickets, but they kept coming. He found them in his mailbox, tucked under his car's windshield wipers, and handed to him by strangers on the street. Each ticket was a winner, as if the universe was determined to make him wealthy whether he wanted to be or not. By the end of his first year of winning, Marcus had collected over $2 million in lottery prizes. The phenomenon attracted attention from mathematicians and researchers who studied probability and coincidence. They calculated that the odds of Marcus's winning streak were so astronomical that it was essentially impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Marcus Thompson had developed an unexplainable connection to lottery success that defied all mathematical probability. Marcus now uses his lottery winnings to fund a scholarship program for children from low-income families. He has stopped trying to avoid lottery tickets and instead accepts his unusual gift as a responsibility. He continues to win every lottery ticket he touches, but he gives away all his winnings to charity. Marcus has learned that sometimes the most extraordinary coincidences come with the responsibility to help others. The most remarkable aspect of Marcus's story is how it has changed his understanding of fate and responsibility. The practical man who once scoffed at lottery tickets now believes that some people are chosen by forces beyond their control to serve as conduits for positive change. His impossible luck has become a tool for helping others, proving that even the most unlikely coincidences can serve a greater purpose.